Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks. You guys are great. You guys are the salt of the earth. You're the best. I want to thank treasonfortruth.com for their sponsorship of some of the speakers. And of course, all the vendors, you should all visit them. These are all good, regular people who are working on behalf of the cause. Check them all out. I haven't got that much time today to talk. Everything's, we have a lot of people, a lot of speakers, a lot of bands, so I got to zip right along here. I got my watch to keep me on schedule. There's somebody down here who's going to give me signals as things go bad. So it starts off with a smile, and then as the time goes on, it turns into like this, and then it turns into like, so I got to keep an eye on that. But I was thinking about a month ago that it would be great for somebody to write a book called Ron Paul, The Army of One. During his tenure in Congress, Ron Paul cast the sole no vote more than any other congressman, and in fact, he cast the sole no vote more than all other congressmen put together.
Now, when the vote is 260 to 157, nobody takes much notice. But when the vote is 434 to 1, people wonder, who is that one? We know who that one is. He's the man lobbyists have tried in vain to buy off, the man whose arm even presidents have been unable to twist. He's the man who refuses to stay confined to the 3x5 card of officially approved opinion in America. Now, there are certain things you just don't say in America, and if you do say them, well, you better be prepared to back off, apologize, explain yourself away. That's the behavior we have come to expect from every politician who accidentally tells the truth. But on May 15th, 2007, Ron Paul got the country's attention because in a presidential debate, he said things about his government's foreign policy that Americans are not supposed to hear. And when Rudy Giuliani demanded a retraction, not a lot of Giuliani fans here? When he demanded a retraction, he probably expected Ron to be like everybody else. Backpedal, apologize, whoops, sorry, I forgot myself, I strayed from the 3x5 card of approved opinion. But not only did he not do that, Dr. Paul amplified his remarks. He stepped right up and right in Rudy's face. And that moment, that was one of the loneliest moments in Dr. Paul's career. He had no idea that he was going to win all the post-debate polls, that there were all these people out there who were going to rally to him. He had no idea about that, but he looked in that camera and told the truth anyway. That's what I mean about being an army of one. In a Republican debate in this very state, Dr. Paul said, we should normalize trade relations with Cuba. Yeah! In Florida, he said that. In a debate in South Carolina, the reddest of red states, he's stuck by his guns on the drug war. He's just going to tell the truth. Then my favorite, he spoke before an Arab American association, and they asked, Dr. Paul, did you write a special speech for our group? And he said, no, I don't write special speeches for different groups. I give the same speech everywhere about individual liberty. But one of my favorite things, a guy you never heard of, Terry Holt, who worked on George W. Bush's presidential campaigns, said that Ron Paul, as he recalled, could not be influenced the way the other congressmen could. He said this, the thing about Ron Paul is, what does he want that we have?
He's never been someone who was interested in being co-opted or in trading and dealing. He would tell us how he was voting, and that was that. There was nothing he wanted that we could offer him in exchange for his vote. As an army of one, he has stood up to the conventional wisdom and been right every time. In 2001, on the House floor, he said the Federal Reserve gave us the boom-bust cycle with the stock market bubble, and now it's inflating a real estate bubble, and that's going to go bust just like all the others. This is a guy who can tell the future, for heaven's sake. And through his great and noble example as the army of one, he's brought out millions of reinforcements, and all of you are Exhibit A of what he's done. All right, but now for the ugliness. I'm sorry, we were having a wonderful event, but I do have to mention Mitt Romney for a minute. What are you going to get? What are you going to get if you vote for Mitt Romney? Well, you're going to get a lot of... No, let me give the answer. All right, you're going to get a lot more neocon bellicosity in foreign policy, fueled by propaganda that would insult a fourth grader. You're going to get a guy who tells you that if we implemented Ron Paul's budget plan that wants to cut $1 trillion, that would cause a depression. Well, you know what? That's exactly the same view that the New York Times and Paul Krugman have, and that's what Mitt Romney is saying. There's your big choice. And then, but don't forget, he's got the true conservative Paul Ryan for his running mate. Yep, my gosh, what a draconian budget plan he has that finally balances in the year 2040. Then he voted for Medicare Part D, the NDAA, and for TARP, which is the worst domestic policy atrocity in all of U.S. history. And he gave all the phony baloney arguments for it. And now, notice what happens. The official left and the official right now play the game. The left portrays him as an extremist. And the fake right says, oh, he's a wonderful conservative. And each of them, they're just trying to raise money. The left raises money by making people think, oh my gosh, Paul Ryan's going to abolish everything. And the right raises money by saying he is. Look at what all these wonderful things. He's just another one of these phonies like all the rest, as anybody with a brain can see. The Republican Party has been like Lucy with the football. And all these suckers every year are Charlie Brown. A vote for Mitt Romney is a vote for the status quo, and anyone who thinks otherwise is absolutely delusional. Romney is the anti-Ron Paul. On foreign policy, on the Fed, on the budget, on civil liberties, what's left? And unlike Ron, he is the consummate politician. Every word is carefully weighed in light of focus group results. In fact, I've sometimes said that the guy is so robotic that it would not surprise me if we opened his head up, we would find circuitry and wiring in there. Dr. Paul will never endorse such a reprehensible human being. Now, we've heard a lot about messaging. Well, what's the message of this particular event? I can only speak for this event. But our message, the way I see it, is that if you even want to imply that we are involved in some kind of common cause with a monster like Mitt Romney, then you have missed the whole point of the Ron Paul revolution. Now, I love Dr. Paul. I would do anything he asked of me. And I look back with a sadness filled with, at the same time, coupled with good memories of things that I've been privileged to do with and for him.
speaking at many events as sort of his opening speaker, and boy, I get to speak to huge audiences when that happens. But testifying before Congress on auditing the Fed and speaking at his great barbecue event where thousands of people come to wish him a happy birthday and working on projects with him, these are memories that I will cherish forever. But the question that so many of us are asking, though, is what do we do now? What now? What should our next step be?
And why isn't Ron Paul telling me what to do? The answer is that only you can know what you are called to do. Only you can know your own strengths. Only you can know exactly where you fit in to this historic struggle. If you're a writer, then write. If you want to become a writer, start practicing. If you have some talent, use it. If you can do audio-video work for a Liberty group, do it. If you're a graphic designer, or an animator, or a humorist, use those talents. And there are plenty of worthy organizations you can join that do great work. The 10th Amendment Center, promoting state nullification. I'm sure the Florida chapter could use some help, headed by the great Andrew Nappy. Join Oath Keepers, too. They're out there doing good work for us. There's my old home, the Ludwig von Mises Institute, educating people around the world. And then for sites to visit, well, for news and fellowship, dailypaul.com. And don't forget the Ron Paul forums, too. But also, of course, LouRockwell.com, what Ron Paul reads every day. And avoid the propaganda by looking at antiwar.com. And incidentally, I wouldn't be altogether unhappy if you paid me a visit at tomwoods.com. But whatever you do, remember the example of Dr. Paul. In a world of cowards, stick to your principles. In a sea of lies, tell the truth. Into the darkness, shine a light. Do those things. Be that person. That is what Ron Paul wants from you. Now, the earliest appearance of the word liberty in writing comes down to us from ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia in 3000 BC. So the land between the rivers, Sumer. We find it in that civilization's cuneiform script. So you and I, that means, are engaged in a struggle that has been going on long before we were born and will persist long after we're dead, the struggle between liberty and power. And so be courageous and studious and persistent. Remember that the one person on this earth you have full power to improve is yourself. Learn and teach whenever and wherever you can. Be your own army of one, and then you will be carrying on the Ron Paul legacy. I have something else to do here. I've just been told I had no notice about this.
I'm introducing the next speaker. Good thing I know him.
Could get a little awkward. Some guys coming up would be a little awkward. But I want to introduce to you a man who has been one of my greatest supporters and benefactors for almost 20 years. This is a guy who, this is not, of course, one of his greatest accomplishments, but it's one of the things that endears him to me the most. Years ago, when my first really big-selling book came out, 2004, I had The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, I had a lot of attacks on me. How dare I say these things? The New York Times attacked me, the Boston Globe attacked me, certain fashionable libertarians attacked me, and the book kept on selling. Which was great. It's just like Ron Paul. You keep it, when the establishment attacks him, people get more curious about it. So it totally backfired. But who stood by me and promoted me and supported me? but our next speaker, Lou Rockwell. I won't take too much of your time. We all know about Lou. He runs the #1 libertarian website in the world, LouRockwell.com. He founded 30 years ago this year, the shining beacon of freedom and scholarship, the Ludwig von Mises Institute. He served as chief of staff for Ron Paul in the late 1970s and early 1980s and has been a close colleague of Dr. Paul for all these years. He is truly a hero and a benefactor to the human race, and it is one of the great privileges of my life to call him a good friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Lou Rockwell.
Well, how great to be here, and I want to thank Deborah Robinette, and I know all the many people who put so much time into putting this program together. It's an honor to be here and to be with you. I want to talk about Ron Paul in the future. One of the most thrilling memories of the 2012 campaign was the sight of all those huge crowds who came out to see Ron. His competition, meanwhile, couldn't fill half a Starbucks. When I worked, as Tom mentioned, as Ron's chief of staff in the late 1970s and early 1980s, we could only have dreamt of such a result. Now, what was it that attracted all those people to Ron Paul? He didn't offer his followers a spot on the federal gravy train. He didn't pass some phony bill. In fact, he didn't do any of the things we associate with politicians. What his supporters loved most about him has nothing to do with politics. Ron Paul is the anti-politician. He tells unfashionable truths. He educates rather than flatters the public. And he stands up for principle even when the whole world is arrayed against him. Now, some people say, well, I love Ron Paul except for his foreign policy. But that foreign policy reflects the best and the most heroic part of who Ron Paul is. Peace is the linchpin of the Ron Paul program, not an extraneous or dispensable adjunct to it. He would never and could never abandon it. Here was the issue, however, that Ron could have avoided had he cared only for personal advancement. But he refused. No matter how many times he's been urged to keep his mouth shut about war and empire, these have remained the centerpieces of his speeches and his interviews. Of course, Ron Paul deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. In a just world, he would also have won the Medal of Freedom and all the honors for which a man in his position is eligible. But history is littered with forgotten politicians who earn piles of awards awarded by other politicians. What matters to Ron more than all the honors and the ceremonies in the world is all of you and your commitment to the immortal ideas he has championed all his life. It's Ron's truth-telling and his urge to educate the public that should inspire us as we carry on this fight into the future. It isn't a coincidence that governments everywhere want to educate children. Government education, in turn, is supposed to be evidence of the state's goodness, its concern for our well-being. Of course, the real situation is less flattering. If the government's propaganda can take root as children grow up, these kids will be no threat to the state apparatus. Indeed, they'll fasten the chains to their own ankles. H.L. Mencken once said that the state doesn't just want to make you obey, it wants to make you want to obey. And that's one thing the government schools do so well. A long-forgotten political thinker, Etienne de la Boétie, wondered why people would ever tolerate an oppressive regime. After all, the people who were governed vastly outnumber the small minority of governors. So the people governed could have put a stop to it all if only they had the will to do so, and yet they rarely do. De la Boétie concluded that the only way any regime could survive was if the public consented to it. That consent could range all the way from enthusiastic support to stoic resignation. But if that consent were ever to vanish, a regime's days would be numbered. And that's why education, real education, is such a threat to any regime. If the state loses its grip over your mind, it loses the key to its very survival. The state is beginning to lose that grip. Traditional media, which have carried the water for the government since time began, it seems, are threatened by independent voices on the internet. I don't think anyone under 25 even reads a newspaper anymore. The media and the political class joined forces to make sure we never found out about Ron Paul. When that proved impossible, they smeared him. And when no one, and told you that no one would want to go to hear Ron Paul, when after all they could hear Tim Pawlenty or Mitt Romney. All this backfired. The more they panicked about Ron, the more drawn to him people were. They wanted to know, what exactly is it that the establishment is so eager to keep us from hearing? Ours is the most radical challenge to the state ever posed. We aren't trying to make the state more efficient, or show it how it can bring in more revenue, or change the pattern of its wealth redistribution. We're not saying that this subsidy is better than that subsidy, or that this kind of tax would make the system run more smoothly than that one. We reject the existing system root and branch. And we don't oppose all the state's wars because they're counterproductive or overextend the state's forces. We oppose them because mass murder based on lies can never be morally acceptable. We don't beg for scraps from the imperial table. We don't seek a seat at that table. We want to knock the table over. We have much work to do. Countless Americans are persuaded that it's in their interest to be looted and ordered around by a ruling elite that in fact cares nothing for their welfare and only to increase its power and wealth at their expense. The most lethal and antisocial institution in history has gotten away with describing itself as the very source of civilization. From the moment they set foot in the government schools, Americans learned that the state is there to rescue them from poverty, unsafe medicine, and rainy days, to provide economic stimulus when the economy is poor, and to keep them secure from shadowy figures everywhere. This view is reinforced, of course, by the broadcast and print media. If the public has been bamboozled, as Murray Rothbard said, it's up to us to do the de-bamboozling. And that means we need to tear the benign mask off the ugly face of the state. That is the task before you, before all of us here today. Begin with yourself. Learn everything you can about a free society. Read the greats, Frederick Bastiat, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard. As you delve into the literature of liberty, share what you're reading and learning. Start a blog, create a YouTube channel, organize a reading group. But whatever you do, learn, spread what you're learning, and never stop. If it is through propaganda that people thoughtlessly accept the claims of the state, then it is through education that people must be brought to their senses. With the kept media on the wane, it's going to be more and more difficult for the state to make its claims stick, to persuade people to keep accepting its lies and propaganda. You've heard it said that the pen is mightier than the sword. Think of the sword as the state. Think of the pen as all of you, each in your own way, spreading the ideas of liberty. Remember that insight of Etienne de la Boétie. All government rests on public consent, and as soon as the public withdraws that consent, any regime is doomed. That's why they fear Iran, that's why they fear us, and it's why, despite all the horrors we read about every day, we may dare to look to the future with hope. Thank you. So I've been